Welcome to the CX Mechanic Workshop, and today I'm delighted to welcome Alec Dalton to the workshop. Alec inspires exceptional experiences using service science, and after operating 5 luxury hotels with organisations that include the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, Walt Disney Parks and Resorts, he now leads the service quality management programs for Marriott International and their global portfolio of over nearly 7,500 hotels. So it's a huge organisation. Alec is co-founder and partner of the Hospitality Leadership Academy, and which is a consultancy firm offering service-oriented management consulting. Now, Alec writes frequently on CX, including the co-authorship of Hospitality Textbook and the first 2 international best-selling customer experience books, of which you and I were co-authors of the book Customer Experience 2. And in 2018, Hotel Management Magazine named him as one of the 30 under 30 list of rising hospitality executives. So in 2021, Customer Experience Professionals Association recognised him as an emerging leader with a CX award. So extremely privileged to have your time today. So thank you very much for joining.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Nick. So delighted to join you.
So yeah, I mean, the pandemic has for many prompted quite a few quick pivots for customers as well as businesses, and some of those consumer trends and business innovations, whilst they might be temporary, others might be here to stay. So what's your view on how organizations can determine which of those are going to be relevant for future and therefore embedded more into their organization's day-to-day work?
Yeah, that's such a fundamental question that so many businesses are trying to answer right now with COVID. I look at my experience with Marriott and the hospitality industry in general. If we think back now, almost, can you believe it, 2 years to the start of the pandemic, there was that, at least in the United States, that first big weekend mid-March where hotels went from 60 plus occupancy nationally down below 20%. Some hotels even had to close. That prompted certainly a lot of quick action on the part of hotel companies to figure out, and not only how do we keep our guests and our associates safe, but also how is this change even more dramatically affecting the way consumers think about booking hotel reservations, about staying in hotels and interacting with other people, about traveling more broadly in general. So, it's always hard to predict the future, no matter how many futurists you talk to or how many scenarios you play out. We've never been able to pin down just the right one. But I think there are a couple of things that hospitality companies can offer as lessons to other businesses. So one thing is being conscious of the pulse of customer feedback, not just for your business, but across society, across analogous businesses, in the public and social domain of media. We often, I think in CX, right, rely on voice of the customer data to inform a lot of the decisions that we make. But the challenge with a lot of the OC programs is that they're retroactive. We have to wait for the customer to experience us. We get their feedback with some delay. It takes even more time to analyze, process it, and who knows how long it's going to take, right, to implement that.
Yeah, and it's quite often it's about the transaction. Yeah, it's, as you say, whilst it's a previous experience, it's actually about one fairly small experience of that brand. So if you've got one-time customers, that might be all you can get. But for you repeat customers, maybe there's the opportunity to talk to them in more detail and try to understand where they're at. How anxious are they? Are they what their concerns and whether that can inform. And there are so many other touch points that should be part of that voice of customer. And I labeled 5 different voices that I would recognize as being part of a mix of listening posts that organizations should have in order to make decisions on, because, as you say, one data point isn't representative and therefore won't necessarily give you all of the answers that you're looking for. So then it's about gut feel, and sometimes, as you know, that whilst that could be right, that creates a hypothesis, it certainly doesn't become a foundation for decision making, particularly if the investment could be significant.
Exactly. And touching back on something you suggested a second ago, Nick, oftentimes in CX, right, we talk about the customer journey, and I think to its detriment, sometimes journey maps or service blueprints are projected as a linear, from left to right, start to finish, a single line, or sometimes, we get excited when we have emotional lines. But in reality, it's often a loop or a bowl of spaghetti. We have to think about, and I think this is an important lesson a lot of companies are really starting to embrace now, and that the pandemic forced many companies to think about, is the fact that customers have life cycles within companies. There is that continuous pattern for many businesses of repurchase, especially in a B2C space. With hotels, that's certainly the case. I've spent, I'm at 131 nights so far this year, and hotels, every night's been different. I'll have as many nights more as I'm able to travel. But my profile as a guest changes over time, whether I'm a leisure guest, a business traveler, I've decided to commingle the trips into this new trend that we call leisure. Kind of being aware of those changing dynamics and trying to meet customers with the trip purpose or the use case, I think more generally, that they're trying to consume at any moment. The other piece that I think is kind of a corollary to that is not just about customer life cycle management, but also a bit about customer life cycle customer lifestyle understanding. So how do we think about the customer as a human being and not just as kind of a cog in that journey along our blueprint? And this is something, again, that a lot of hospitality companies and many others paid attention to at the onset throughout the pandemic. Our experience when we travel is informed by our experiences living our daily life, again, consuming media, hearing from other people through referral recommendations, warnings, and cautions. And by taking a pulse on what healthcare operations were doing from a sanitation standpoint, by taking a pulse on what retail was doing, we could very quickly almost use those as litmus tests to figure out, well, what's our position on masks? How evident and overt do cleanliness measures need to be? Do we need the guest to see the housekeeper cleaning their room? Or do they have enough trust and confidence in us? Are there certain cues or signs or things like electrostatic sprayers or little door seals that need to be evident? And a lot of those decisions were informed by other businesses that are patroned by the same customer that we serve. So I think that's an important tip.
I think that's a really important point, because coming back to my retail experience, and certainly working with FMCG brands, the amount of touch points that might be part of a customer journey now are significant. You've got so many different digital channels starting to inform people's decision making. So naturally, people are becoming more selective. People talk about it as a personalization, but the reality is it's just what's more convenient for people to access the information they need. But if you have 170 touch points, for example, really only 6 or 7 are going to be the ones that critically impact somebody's decision making. But that may be different for much smaller groups now, rather than taking that Pareto split of 80-20. So you're not just going to focus on the 20% and hope you get the 80% of the sale. Now you have to be much more careful about, okay, within that segmentation, who are the people that we want to engage with, but they will be slightly different in terms of the next people we engage with, because their needs will be different. And as you've already identified, you've got business, you've got leisure, and then you've got that combined group of people who are doing a little bit of business, but then want to spend their spare time actually enjoying the fact that they've traveled somewhere to be in a new place. So it is a different way of thinking, but it's also making better use of the tools that already exist. So for me, it's about adapting those, not panicking and going, oh, we don't have all this information, what do we do? It's, well, you do. It's just, how do you mine it? How do you get out of it what you need? And maybe you need to make some tweaks in order to get the right outcome. And you're right, you can easily look at those that are in faster moving sectors where they've had to make changes, and you can learn from their mistakes as well as the things they do positively. And then you can talk to customers and say, well, yeah, how anxious are you? Talk to your staff. I mean, how anxious are they about being back and having to mingle with different customers coming in all the time from all over the world? And, when you think of, we talk so often about the customer and the employees, they will have just as many challenges around, well, how do they stay safe in this situation? And as people become vaccinated, people become more comfortable with this new norm, and I think hygiene hands and showing that things have been cleaned effectively, as you say, that the little wrappers that go around the loos and stuff to show that they've been cleaned, you're safe to sit on them, right? Those types of things are really important, because it just reassures people that the fears that they've got are being addressed. But that comes through a little bit of a reorganization, as you say, from your service blueprint, by understanding everybody who's involved. So you're right, it's not just a customer, it's not just an employee, it's about the entire engagement across every person within an organization and all of the potential transaction points that need to be considered.
That's exactly right. And it also requires consideration of, in many respects, the five senses, especially when you're talking about a brick and mortar business like a hotel or a restaurant or retail environment, healthcare, certainly, where somebody has to go into a physical space. We have to be conscious of what are our customers, what are our guests seeing, what are they hearing, what are they feeling, touching. All of those sensory cues help to infuse that trust that you were just describing. And that really, at the end of the day, is what helped a lot of companies succeed through COVID, or what caused a lot of companies to succumb to more challenges than were necessary. If one, they couldn't build and retain trust with their customer bases, and two, they couldn't leverage their reputations to gain at least some degree, I think, of forgiveness from customers when not every business is going to get it right every time. But when you have that brand reputation, when you have that trust, and when you use things like a closed loop feedback process for complaint handling, you make sure that there's active problem resolution strategies in place. That gives customers assurance that even if something does go wrong, the organization is going to do right by you. It's going to do its best to fix it, and ideally prevent it from ever happening again for you and hopefully for others.
Yeah, and we saw a similar, I guess, response to the banks when we had the financial crash in 2008. What happened overnight was trust was just destroyed,
right?
And those that have worked harder on the trust element have been more successful in recovering faster. And that's the same with this. Okay, the trust isn't broken because you've done something wrong in this case. It's the trust around, what's going to keep me safe, which is a very different type of emotion to be handling. But it's fundamentally the same process that an organization has to go through in order to respond to it. Exactly. They have to demonstrate really quickly that they've considered everything that a customer is worried about, and that they are providing that trust in what they're doing.
Are there things that we can learn from that feedback that can shape the experience at that hotel, or that need to be considered at a global level? A lot of what my team's work in global quality does is focus on VOC feedback at that 7,500 hotel level. How do we think about entire brands? How do we think about food and beverage programs that cross continents? And how do we use those kind of social themes and socioeconomic themes to inform recommendations about the future direction of the business? Largely influenced by customer feedback. And again, those analogous businesses and experiences that we're observing in our own personal lives.
Yeah, and ultimately customers have the answer to those questions, because they will walk with their feet or their wallets, and you will learn very quickly if you're getting it wrong.
Exactly. So, in many respects, I kind of think about customer satisfaction as a bit of an open book test. If you ask to open the book, you find those touch points to ask the customer how they're feeling, how they're doing, and what we can do better to serve them. More often than not, they'll tell you, not always, and they won't always tell you exactly what they need. Sometimes you've got to do your due diligence and intuition and figure that out within your area of expertise. But sometimes I feel like we pretend that customer satisfaction is ominous and ambiguous, and that it's unattainable. In many respects, it's not.
No, it's not always black and white, because if it was, it'd be easy. You could attribute an action to the insight, and away you go. And people don't always know what they need. They just feel that something's not quite right. So it's how do you then interpret that? How do you navigate it? And that, for me, is why you need more than that measurement. You need to understand what's going on in the market, as you say, parallel markets where there might be a follow-on trend that will then impact hospitality, and what's going on around the business. So people will tell you what, again, we talk about a small amount of people who will complain compared with those that might have an issue. It's the same when it comes to response rates to voice of customer. You're still getting a small percentage of your customer base telling you what they think, most of whom are pretty much fans of the business because they want to tell you about the great experience they've had, or they want to tell you it's not quite as good this time, but they've still got a degree of loyalty. So there's always a little bit of unintended bias to kind of counteract to get to the actual truth. But you have to look at the impact of, and if you take it at a unit level and an actual single hotel, that feedback versus the sales versus profitability versus stuff, all of those factors need to be considered in a voice of customer program as to the performance of the organization. Exactly. And then you can scale it up, because as you scale it up, you'll start to see that some of those trends come together and you've got one pillar of challenge that could be addressed relatively simply, or it could just be completely random and at a local level. But from a global organization, if you can find things that affect most of the hotels and you can fix those easily, then it becomes a simple choice to make. Beyond that, it's down to the talent of the individual hotel staff to navigate it and then understand it. And sometimes there needs to be a little bit of support in order to interpret that information. But again, it's a combination of touch points that give you that insight, that give you the whole picture. If you try and just look at one or the other, it might be indicative, but it might not be exactly why it's happening, and therefore your action doesn't always work because you're not addressing the core issue because you don't know it.
Right, exactly. And a couple of reactions there. One, for businesses that operate multiple units, I think about whether it's a franchise restaurant or multi-chain hotel company, we can solve problems at a hotel level, but we can solve problems one-to-one between the guest and their particular issue. We can solve a systematic issue at the hotel. We can solve the systematic issue, more broadly, let's say at a global level. Especially in times like these, but frankly, I kind of think always, if there are systematic issues that are affecting hotels, then the parent ought to think about ways to improve that experience, the programs, the standards, the policies, so that each hotel isn't resolving it every time the issue occurs. And so that's where having teams focused in global quality, that could be in operations, they could be in CX, they could be a hybrid of the two, but having them pay really close attention to the operational aspects of VOC, paying attention to customer problems, complaints, paying attention to the things that satisfy customers the most that we might need to amplify. Yep. And celebrate, which way I don't think no company does enough of. I think that's a great opportunity for an organization to kind of take advantage of that Pareto effect, like we were kind of talking about earlier. How can you kind of solve for the globe instead of having the globe solve redundantly every single time it goes through it on its own?
And what you're touching on there is one of the key elements of customer experience. It's about creating an experience that a customer can become familiar with. It's about standardizing that so that it's delivered consistently. But in doing so, not only is the customer getting what they expect and they become familiar with it, you're also not wasting time, effort, energy, and money, or ultimately your profit, on refixing the same thing. And whilst we constantly talk about the customer experience being about the customer, ultimately getting that customer experience right is because we as a business want to give everything we can to them, but make money doing it.
And incidentally, in our book, Customer Experience 2, that's what my chapter is focused on. It's all about what in the industry is termed the cost of poor quality. It's what are the costs associated with getting things wrong. You have refunds, rebates, retrainings, reprocessing, rework. You've got waste, you've got scrap. All sorts of costs build up over time. And organizations that can effectively manage their profit are those that both think about how do we bring our customers in, how do we reduce as much waste and non-value adding activities as possible, but how do we attempt consistency, quality, so that as part of those non-value activities, we're not generating more waste and turning off customers in the process of dissatisfying.
And quite often they don't consider it because it's not directly linked. As you say, the consequences of some of those challenges might be then passed over to a different department or a different part of the organization to handle. So therefore, the root cause isn't necessarily ever corrected. And that in itself is part of the process of why customer experience professionals exist. It's to identify those and then to streamline and improve. So it's a really straightforward, for me, it's a straightforward process. And companies are just starting to understand that that's one of the opportunities that customer experience professionals can bring to the market. But thanks, Alex. It's been so exciting and a really good conversation. You about the hospitality sector and the changes that you've had to make in the global organisation are huge and significant. And just listening to you talk about some of the challenges that you're facing at every level of the organisation has been fascinating. And I'm glad you've been able to join us today. And thank you to our audience. Please like and share the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell icon to get notifications when the next episode is launched. All the best and goodbye.
Thank you very much.